When you mention the word nuclear, I think we all have a certain connotation in mind.
We don't have anybody else who's out there trying to do what we're doing. Right now, it's $155 billion globally. By 2050, we think that's going to increase to almost $300 billion. We've got the technology. Now it's just time for action.
Our guest today, Rod Baltzer, who's the CEO of Deep Isolation.
1 in 3 of us live within 50 miles of stored nuclear fuel. Deep Isolation is a nuclear waste disposal company. We are the only company trying to do borehole disposal of spent nuclear fuel globally.
Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast, Startup to Stock Exchange. You know, I've spoken in the past about certain buzzwords, but I think that you're in for a treat today because when you mention the word nuclear, I think we all have a certain connotation in mind, and I also think that our guest today, Rod Baltzer, who's the CEO of Deep Isolation, I think he's going to enlighten us about what nuclear, that word really does mean and could mean for a company like Deep Isolation. And I think in today's world, you're going to be very enlightened with what this company is doing and accomplishing. And with that very brief introduction, we're going to get right into it. I really appreciate you taking the time, Rod. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Seth.
You know, someone with your background, I'm fascinated about how you ended up in the driver's seat that you are today. But before we back into sort of how you got here, if you don't mind, can you just tell us a little bit about Deep Isolation, what it is, what you do, who you're looking to get in front of, things like that?
Deep Isolation is a nuclear waste disposal company. So we take spent nuclear fuel out of commercial power reactors, and we've got technology to dispose of that using directional drilling like you'd use in the oil and gas industry, deep underground. The beauty of that is you can actually co-locate that with reactors and generation storage facilities. It doesn't have to be one repository for the entire nation. And so it can be distributed, it's modular, and it's future-proof. We've designed it to be compatible with the old systems and the new ones coming on. So that's us in a very brief nutshell.
And how long have you been doing this? How long's the company been around?
The company's been around for 10 years. And so this this month, June of 26, is our 10-year anniversary. And I've been there since 2018.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I guess let me then jump into that question. I don't know how many people out there, they wake up when they finish high school or college and they say, I want to be a nuclear engineer. Maybe people do, but you know, that is not the route that you started with. Give us a little bit about you know, your journey to get where you are today.
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm, and so when I went to college, I had a scholarship to go in the ag economics department, and I was looking at majors and picked accounting, which of course led me directly to nuclear waste.
Of course.
Okay, maybe there was a couple more steps. Yeah, so I actually started off in public accounting. I did about 7 years with Ernst and Young, and then I joined a private company that had low-level radioactive waste disposal company with it. And so they effectively handed me a set of binders, and they said, "We're spending a lot of time and money on this company, but we don't really understand it that well. Can you get more involved?" And I did. I think I overachieved, became CFO, and then eventually president and CEO. We sold that company to private equity in 2018. In 2016, Elizabeth Mueller and her father, Rich, who had co-founded Deep Isolation, had come in to talk to me and ask about community engagement and how we did things. They took a tour of the facility, and evidently they were impressed. And they called when I had switched my LinkedIn marker over and said, "Hey, do you remember us? Would you like to do in high level what you did on low level?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." So I joined them in 2018, and it's been great.
How you know, I'm fascinated because, you know, I do think that a lot of people that are successful end up getting thrown into something. But this is a very high level topic. What was that like, that journey of sort of self-educating yourself about all the nuances and the complexities of what it is that you guys are doing today?
Well, luckily, I had 20 years of experience in low level waste. And during that time, this was with waste control specialists. We actually had legislative change to allow a private company to own a facility like that in Texas. We got a license and went through that application process, all the safety analysis, performance assessments. I can't tell you how many hundreds of geology meetings and talking about waste forms and packaging and transportation rules. And it was on the job, deep immersion. When we moved to high level waste, it's different regulations. It's NRC instead of the state, but a lot of it was very similar. The geology, of course, is very, very similar. And so it was very beneficial. But it's an interesting job and an interesting industry because there's so much detail and engineering and specificity. But you do need somebody kind of at the top who's got this general knowledge that can put it all together and make sure that it all makes sense and everything's hanging together and we don't have one piece that's really strong and one piece that's really weak and just make sure it's all there as a comprehensive package.
Put it together with a little red bow on top.
That's
Um,
right.
I am curious because as I guess maybe I'll call myself an entrepreneur or others out there that are entrepreneurs, most of the time the challenge is finding the product, finding the clients and maybe marketing, and that's really about it. It seems like to an outsider, and tell me if I'm wrong, the hurdles to overcome in a business like yours. I mean, you're dealing probably with regulatory issues. As if that's not enough, you've got political issues, you've got technical issues, and you've got community issues. How do you juggle all that? And is there one that is more challenging than the other? Tell us about sort of that all-out approach to tackle these different verticals.
Nuclear obviously got created during World War II, and they started civilian nuclear in the 1950s. And by the 1980s, they knew that you should dispose of the waste in a deep geologic repository. And so at that point, the world started to move toward a mine repository. So this is a big, tunnel underground, 18-foot diameter tunnel. You can literally drive a train into it. And it's less than half a mile deep. And so, the world started to move toward that and just kept moving, but nobody's ever actually disposed of the waste. And so we've known what we should do and we've had the waste. It's been sitting there, but we just haven't been able to do it. And a lot of that, I think, is the politics. I don't want it in my state. Why are you transporting it across my state? The communities involved in that, that discussion, and so it is. It's really been a challenge. Finland will be the first. They should have their repository open soon, and you see that Finland's very trusting of their engineers and scientists. And so I think, here in the US, we're probably much less trusting of anybody in political appointment, no matter which administration it is. And so having something that's kind of scientifically proven and true is a little easier to swallow, is what we're seeing. And so, it's been incredibly slow moving. What makes deep isolation a little bit different is that instead of moving that waste, it's already in your backyard. What do you want to do with it? Instead of I'm bringing it into your backyard. And what we've found through some surveys is that most Americans don't realize it, but 1 in 3 of us live within 50 miles of stored nuclear fuel. And so then, what do you want to do? Do you want to transport it long distances to a centralized repository, if there was such a thing? Do you want to leave it where it's at, above ground in storage indefinitely? Or do you want to bury it where it's at, as long as that can be done safely? And 80% said, bury it where it's at. I don't want you transporting it through my neighborhoods, and I really don't want it above ground that long. Let's do something with it. And I think what we're seeing is, particularly this new generation, they've got less history and baggage and whatnot with nuclear weapons and all that production that happened so long ago. And they're interested in not kicking a can down the road to the next generation. We can do something about it. We've got the technology. Now it's just time for action.
And what does the competitive landscape look like for this? Meaning, are there lots of people out there doing what you do? Is this a unique, well, I'm sure it is unique in many different ways, but how does that play out in terms of capturing new opportunities for the company.
We are the only company trying to do borehole disposal of spent nuclear fuel globally. And so as we look around, there's national labs like Sandia who have studied this for a long time, but they can't commercialize it. But we don't see anybody else in this commercial space, and we've been here 10 years now. I think part of that people, as I explained, we're just leveraging what oil and gas does in the nuclear industry. Nuclear in the 80s thought it was a mined repository and that boreholes were too challenging at that time, and never looked back to see that oil and gas had made a lot of progress. They developed this thing called directional drilling. They've really leveraged some of the technology, and so they just hadn't talked to each other very much. And so I think deep isolation's kind of brought that to bring those two industries together. We collaborate with like Halliburton as our drilling collaborator, NAC International for canisters and transportation and other things, and Amentum as surface handling and high hazard facilities, and just having them all kind of communicate together and work toward that has been the kind of secret, I guess, of deep isolation. But we don't have anybody else who's out there trying to do what we're
That's
doing.
amazing. I mean, I think for any investor or fund or banker or like when you're looking for something and there's no competition, like how do you not smile at that? I mean, that's a great opportunity to pursue. I am
And it's
curious,
not a small market.
right?
It's right now it's $155 billion globally, and by 2050 we think that's going to increase to almost $300 billion.
No,
So
you actually nailed my next thought, meaning is the mission or the vision for the company a worldwide opportunity, or is it strictly, at least starting off in the US? You had mentioned Finland. How does that what does that look like in terms of the roadmap?
yeah, it's definitely a global roadmap. And so in the U.S., we've got what they call the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, and it says only DOE can get a license, and only at Yucca Mountain, Nevada, which is effectively dead, and it's a mine repository. And so we always thought this would be international first. But in January, DOE sent out a request for information for states for nuclear life cycle innovation campuses. I'll call them campuses. And they effectively said if you're interested in nuclear and you're willing to host a repository and you raise your hand, we'll help you with fuel enrichment or nuclear reactors, reprocessing facilities, all this other stuff. But you have to be willing to dispose of the waste, including boreholes. And so 26 states raised their hand. They've narrowed that down now to 8 to 9, and want to get down to 3 to 5, as I understand it. By the end of the year, looking at agreements with those states. And so it really has, I think, jump started the conversation in the U.S., and we see it hopefully catching up with the rest of the globe. And hopefully we see action on this soon.
It's funny because when you talk about that, you guys have been around for 10 years. On the one hand, that's certainly very comforting, right? Like you've been through the ups and downs and pivots and you guys are still standing, which is amazing. But at the same time, I am curious because probably a lot of what you do is raise capital. How do you find investors, or how do you convey to investors that, this is the type of business that we're not going to get FDA approval and everything's going to be smooth sailing from there. Like this does require patience and I would imagine a long-term vision, right? So how do you sort of find those right types of investors, or what's the type of messaging that you try to give over to them?
You're right. We have raised money most of our life at deep isolation, and part of that is that startup world, and the pivots are definitely familiar to us as we explore where to go and how to do things. And we've been fortunate that we've had a lot of government interest in us. We think our customer is a government like the U.S. DOE. That's going to take title to this fuel in the long run. They've got that responsibility under their law. We find that the same around the globe. And so we've had over $6 million worth of funding from DOE, and then recently got selected for what they call Scale Up with their Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. And this will allow us to do a full scale demonstration at depth with the surface handling equipment and everything. It's all non radioactive, but it's otherwise going to mimic exactly what we would do in a real life operation. And so that kind of interest, I think, has really helped us. We started last summer trying to raise some money to fund it ourselves because our customers were telling us this is what we need to do for that next step. And we know that, once we get this done with the first domino, the next one's going to fall a lot easier. But it is a pretty steep road. Not everybody's, we don't have any competition because this is a hard road.
Right,
But,
right.
we also feel like we've made a lot of project progress. The technology is there. It's developed and engineered and ready to go. And now we just have to show it. So we're fortunate to be where we are.
When we talk about raising money, or companies that are capital intensive, very often people choose the route of going public. Now, can you sort of explain to us where you are in that process, meaning you have, I think, filed with the SEC, effective, not yet trading. Just give us some insight in terms of that map and sort of why, because a lot of people that are listening might be companies that are contemplating doing an IPO, a SPAC, a direct listing. Why choose the route that you have, and where are you at with it?
So last year, we started, evaluating that we had made all this progress, and we knew our customers wanted a full scale demonstration, but we were unable to find government funding for it. And so we thought, well, if we can raise that ourselves, then we could just self fund this demonstration, and it wouldn't have to wait. Timing was critical for us. And so, as we looked at the market, it looked like the public markets were very excited about nuclear, and it might be easier to raise funds in the public market than through our traditional private networks that we had in the past. And so we did open that door up, and we all walked boldly through it. And we did our alternative public offering. This was kind of like a SPAC, except you bring your own pipe. And the company we had, our sponsor of that, they'd done about 20 of these. And so they had a playbook. We followed the playbook and eventually made it through there. We had a $30 million offering, and we oversubscribed and raised 33 million out of that. We then went through the SEC process. That was, longer than we would have hoped. Part of that was due to the government shutdowns and things, and the timing was unfortunate. But we were declared effective by the SEC, and are now going through hopefully the final stages of getting listed for over-the-counter trading.
Congratulations on that journey. It's one that we obviously know well. So I'm sure that you will do well coming out on the other side, and that clearly that is one of the reasons why companies go public, is to raise capital, use the stock as currency, acquisitions, things like that. I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, not too much on the personal side, but what does an average day look like for you? Meaning, is it spent in research meetings, developing? Because I would imagine a lot of this type of business requires very high level relationships. What does a typical day look like for you?
I wish there was a typical day. They all seem to be pretty different. But generally, we do a lot of remote work, and so getting the team together, having calls, etc., is a part of that day. You're right, talking to our supply chain partners and customers, and just meetings, facilitations with industry groups, doing podcasts and other things to get the message out, and interest in investment is important to us as well. But then there's the details of reading through a technical report, making sure that we understand what's going on, what those next stages are, planning out that strategy. It does vary day to day, but I laugh, since I did come up through that accounting aspect. Every dollar that goes through the company, uh, everything that happens in the company eventually gets converted into a dollar and gets put in the accounting registry. So, it's important to have that kind of detailed mindset as you look through there. Make sure you understand what's going on at your company, how you're spending that money, if it's done wisely and appropriately or not. There's a good piece of that as well.
Well, you know what? I want to be mindful of your time, but before I let you go, can I ask if we were looking obviously whatever you're comfortable saying, but if we're looking, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, what might we be seeing of where the company is at, or what's ahead on in terms of milestones that we might look forward to?
Yeah, for the full-scale demonstration, we've ordered the long lead items. So we expect we'll be receiving those, by the end of the year, start drilling early next year. So that'll allow us to place and retrieve canisters, mid next year. The longer term is the shielded handling equipment on the surface. The engineering for construction of that is going through, and then we've got to actually, build the equipment. It's designed based on what they already do at nuclear power plants, so but it's customized for our sized canister and our operations. So that'll be the kind of near term next couple of years. But meanwhile, with this campus initiative from DOE, we're excited that, if they do narrow that down to 3 states, we may need to go have a presence in those 3 states and make sure we're engaging and doing the right things there, as well as internationally and overseas. So we do have a wide range of activities in front of us, but we're optimistic that, we could actually implement borehole disposal in the next, 5 years, and that would be fantastic to have something like that happen, just globally, for what that means for the nuclear industry, as well as being, appropriate stewards of what we've been given.
That's an amazing objective, and as I said, a patient approach, but hopefully one that will be well worth it. What is the company website if somebody wants to get more information?
Yeah, please go to deepisolation.com. And we've got an investor portal there with more information, an investor deck, all our SEC filings, but we've also got a great amount of technical publications. Some are a little bit more for the layman, and some, if you want a deep dive on probabilistic safety analysis, this is your place.
You probably also got a great transfer agent listed there, I'm sure. But
We probably do.
listen, Rod, thank you so much for sharing some of these insights. And I do hope that well, first of all, we'll keep an eye on some of the SEC filings and for some good news when the time is right. And I hope you'll come back and you'll share some great updates when the time is right. So thank you again.
Appreciate it, Seth.
All
Thanks.
right.